There's a lawsuit that came down yesterday against the Department of Justice from our friends over at Power the Future, an energy watchdog group. Daniel Turner is here with Power the Future on KCMO. Daniel, fill us in, my man. What's this lawsuit all about?
Oh, it's great to be on your show. Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is I believe it's our 40th lawsuit against the Biden administration. And this is our escalation one because we've been in litigation with the State Department since January on this John Kerry climate office. Everyone knows John Kerry was appointed to this role as climate czar. He had a huge budget, a huge staff, but he refuses to tell us what they do and who these staff members are and what his mandate is. And in case your audience has forgotten, the Freedom of Information Act requires that you have to tell the American people what you're doing with the tax dollars. And this is a taxpayer-funded office. So we're not looking for anything secretive here. We just want to know what John Kerry is doing and what he has been doing the last 3+ years. That litigation went nowhere. The Biden administration stalled and just thumbed their nose at us and said, we're not telling you what John Kerry did. And so now we've escalated that to include the Department of Justice, because the Department of Justice is clearly coordinating this effort. The last information we got from them was, we will tell you everything you want to know, but in another 90 days, meaning after the election. And so it's tantamount on election interference when they will not tell us what they are doing.
What is, I don't want you to speculate necessarily, but what is your concern when it comes to John Kerry's role? Is it monetary in nature? Is it something else that you have concern about with what he's doing in this role as climate czar?
Yeah, well, it's all of the above. It's monetary in where is this money going, right? If we appropriate money to every other agency in the federal government, in theory, we know where it's going. That's part of the scandal of what's happening right now with these FEMA dollars that were spent on illegals, because you're supposed to spend it on disaster relief, and North Carolina has a disaster, and FEMA says, yeah, we don't have the money. That's not the way the government works. But with John Kerry's office, what is the money for? What's the purpose of this organization? What is your budget? Quite frankly, who are you coordinating with? What outside groups? And we've all seen the war on fossil fuels. We've seen mandates on gas stoves and gas hot water heaters, and you're all going to drive an EV by 2030. Well, clearly this influence is coming from somewhere, and we as an American people have a right to know who's making these decisions.
So when you look at it, Daniel Turner of Power of the Future, you don't think right now you can get any answers on this in the next 28 days before the election?
That's the funny thing, is that we've been in this litigation since January. And like I said, the last response we got from them was the deadline so far in the future that it clearly will come out well after the election. And so it makes one speculate, what has he been doing that they don't want the American people to know? Now, look, I understand there is the need in the federal government for some clandestine operations, right? We have a military, we have CIA. I understand there are some covert activities. But what is John Kerry doing that is so secretive that the American people don't have a right to know? Or if they did know, they knew the American people would dislike it before the November election? That's just a legitimate question.
Yeah, it is. Daniel Turner's here, of course, energy advocate with Power of the Future on KCMO in Kansas City. Daniel, I know, the energy issue is one that hits home, especially in some of the key swing states, most notably Pennsylvania. As you have gotten organized, as we have all looked down the home stretch of this election, what are you hearing, and what is maybe getting lost in the conversation when it comes to some of these key swing states that I know you're focused on, you're looking at, as it relates to the energy issue that will be on the ballot between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump?
Well, that's exactly it. Energy is on the ballot. And when you look at a state like Pennsylvania in particular, 500,000 Pennsylvanians work directly or indirectly in the fossil fuel industry. That's oil, gas, coal, pipeline servicing. But even when you say indirectly, it's because, you need uniforms, and those uniforms are made by companies or they provide, safety goggles, and those safety goggle companies are tied to the oil and gas industry. And if 500,000 people voted for their best interest, for the interest of Pennsylvania, for their job and their family, And if those 500,000 people had spouses and voting age kids, Pennsylvania would not be in play, right? Pennsylvania wouldn't ever elect anyone who says, we're going to have a ban on fracking until, right, that polls poorly. And then she reverses course and says, well, maybe we won't have a ban on fracking. But energy workers could make a difference in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, even a blue state like New Mexico, where half of their revenue comes from oil and gas royalties, and a huge percentage of the state works in this industry. The problem, Pete, very honestly, a lot of these folks don't vote, right? It's a problem across the country. We have very low voter turnout normally, and unfortunately, a lot of Americans think, it's rigged. It doesn't make a difference. What is one vote going to do? So mobilizing these folks and getting them to realize that they have to fight for their industry, for their job, for their community. It is a challenge, but I think people are starting to wake up to it.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Are you getting an anecdotal sense that there is an awakening on this issue in particular? And regardless of how you feel personally about the candidates, there are two very clear options here when you talk about energy independence in America going forward. And it certainly seems like with what's happening in the Middle East, we should all want America to be energy independent right now. And with what's going on in China, and we know how, China impacts this whole Green New movement that's happening.
Absolutely. And these are some issues that I think J.D. Vance pushed really well in the vice presidential debate, saying if you really believed in climate change, then you wouldn't want to be buying these products from China. You wouldn't want to buy oil and gas from Venezuela and from Saudi Arabia. And he had a line that I thought was great because I say it all the time as well. Kamala Harris's own policies prove she doesn't believe that climate change is as an existential threat. And so I do think people are starting to realize that these enormous flip-flops mean that she's a loose cannon. If you come out and say for years, I support a fracking ban, but suddenly Pennsylvania's at play and you say, actually, no, I changed my mind. Mm-hmm. And when pressed, as we saw in the 60 Minutes interview, she cannot explain why she changed positions. Her response was, I've been vice president for 4 years and I get to travel. Well, that's not an answer, right? That's an anecdote. And so if your livelihood depends upon fracking and 180,000 people in Pennsylvania alone, 180,000 people work directly in fracking, you can't roll the dice on whether or not she will change her mind once she's elected if the fracking ban is going to continue. So I think her own rhetoric and her own flippancy towards these critical issues is driving people to vote.
Daniel Turner, Power of the Future, always doing great work. Daniel, thanks for being here on KCMO in Kansas City, and I'm not going to hold my breath on that lawsuit getting figured out before Election Day.
Us neither, but you got to try. So thanks, Pete. I appreciate it.
Keep up the great work. Daniel Turner on KCMO 95.7 FM.